Celebrating the 4th of July, Truefire are running a Stars, Stripes and Strings sale, providing 60% off of their all-access pass. If you're interested in that you can dip in and out of every single thing on Truefire. Really great value for money. Also, they got 50% off of some individual courses, so check out the link in the description if you're interested in that. I think we spend so much time thinking and being told as guitarists that we're too loud, that in some ways I think there's this idea that guitarists are always loud and always obnoxious with it, to the point that I've actually been pretty shy about, making stage volume, for the last sort of 10 years. You bring an amp and people look at you like, what you're doing. You turn like a deluxe reverb up to 2.5, 3, and suddenly you're looking around like, is this too loud? And I think we maybe need to flip these things on their head a little bit. And instead of thinking about the guitar as always being too loud, what I wanted to kind of discuss is that feeling of when you know that it's too quiet and that you can't actually compete. And I maybe getting away from it, that this idea is that there is like a competition or a loudness war, because that's like, it doesn't really work particularly well either. But this idea that actually at some points the guitar really does need to be loud if it's the focal point. Other points it definitely doesn't. But that's kind of what I wanted to discuss today, and how do you know when you've got that balance right. So I don't know how many of you gig, I guess in general. I don't know anything about any of you. But some of you probably do gigs. Some of you probably do gigs where you've got sound people. And some of you probably do gigs where you don't have sound people or sound man or someone grumpy, doing stuff. Now, on most of the gigs that I do, or quite a lot of them, I tend to take the PA myself. So I'm in charge of that stuff, and so for me as well, with that comes the necessity that no one is going to be riding any faders or anything like that. So what it means is that when I want to take a solo in certain circumstances, I have to boost it up above the level. And this is one thing that I've noticed with sort of keyboard players that don't seem to have this grasped quite as much. I think guitarists are a little bit more savvy with it, but sometimes you'll be playing with a keyboard player and you go to them to take a solo and they're just using the same sort of sound that they were using before and haven't boosted it, and you're like, well, you're not really going to get heard. What I do as a caring band member in that circumstance is try to play softer than I was playing for the rest of the thing. So I do the same when I'm playing with my buddy Jake Loosemore when we're doing our gigs. We quite often gig at Lyme Regis, the ship-in. I try to do this. We'll get on to some other complicating factors with this, but if someone else is taking their solo, I'll sit back further and try to just kind of I definitely won't be slamming the strings at all. You know, I might play a longer ringing chord. It won't have drive on it most of the time. So yeah, you're trying to sort of be there, but also kind of bring the average volume down so that they are being heard above stuff, right? Because that is kind of, I guess, the point of someone else taking a solo, right? Is that they're supposed to be being heard as well. Now, one other thing that can happen, sure, some of us have been on gigs like this, where it's just a direct gig, you're just using a modeler, and you're taking a solo, or, you know, you think you are, and you're just really not sure what is going out front. Now, this is a thing, I think, for some of us, which is a little bit, like, annoying. So, my best example of this was I was on this gig, local gig, and had to move the car suddenly because it was like a stable, and they were like, we need to get access. So midway through the set, it didn't matter because it was going horribly anyway, and no one was in this part of the wedding venue. And they said, can you just move the car? And then when I came back, the band had started Johnny Be Good without me, and I didn't have time to get my ears in. And then I go to start playing Johnny Be Good, and there's no guitar coming out of the front of the house anyway. And this is, I think, a little bit of the flip side of, you know, us being too loud for so many years, that once you've given control over to some sound guys, I think they're just so fed up with guitar in general and guitarists that they'll, in some cases, just go, all right, well, let's not have any of that out front of the house. I just want to hear piano, bass, and keys. And I've definitely been to loads of gigs, like higher level gigs, where, you know, people are using modelers and stuff like that, and it's the same thing universally on those types of gigs. The only one that wasn't was Josh Della Victoria in Sungazer. Most of the time the guitars are so low in the mix that you don't really hear them at all, even when they're taking a solo. So I've saw like Bill Murray, I saw Sleep Token, I've seen the 1975, you know, Bill Murray, you hear the sax really well, like through the entire gig. When it comes to hearing the solo from the guitar player, not so much. And same sort of thing happened when I saw Jack Gardner and Owain. The difference with them, again, was this, and I guess this is part of what you can do if you're like a two guitar band. When Owain and Jack Gardner were playing together, you didn't hear much, like, there wasn't enough separation there. Similarly with Pliny. So Pliny has, is it Jack, his the guy that plays guitar with him, when they're both playing together, really hard to pick out Pliny's parts above that sort of threshold. So I think that is kind of one of the things that I've tried to do when I'm playing in a two guitar band, is that just be conscious of that, as having been a member of an audience, and also having been a soloist. And when the other players are playing like really loud, just that feeling of despair is just like, well, I know I'm not going to be heard above this. So there's one really key song that I do with Jake. What is it? Oh Well, Fleetwood Mac. And normally it will just be coming off the back of his solo. So we'll have all the gain and all the volume on his Cerebella, which is like a 44 watt amp. And then I'll be on like a deluxe reverb or a 15 watt matchless clone. And I go to take my solo, I'm like, I just feel like I certainly can't hear myself when I'm right by the amp. People out front, I'm guessing most of the time, are not going to be able to hear it either. However, there is also this other thing where the funny thing about guitar amps is that we tend to stand out of the way of like the most powerful beams of them. And I think this is the other thing that sound guys have to put up against, is that we're like shooting potentially like 100 dB. I just looked this up, like a Fender Champ totally cranked could be as loud as 100 dB. That's just 5 watts. I think all amps can be too loud for some scenarios, and even the quiet ones are potentially, you know, in some circumstances going to be a little bit on the loud side. I think you just have to try and be a bit sensitive with it. But again, what do you do when you're fairly confident that you're not being heard? I'm not sure. I guess you just play like you were being heard anyway. And I don't know if any of you guys also have the same thing as me, where I see so many guys like posting videos like where they're playing with a drummer, And it's either two extremes. Like a lot of the time, like Philip Sace or someone like that will be making the drums seem quiet, and in that case, or Robin Ford, you must just, there's no way of like, because I know probably those drummers hit as hard as every other drummer in the world, they all do it, but it just must mean that those amps are absolutely cooking, right? But there's no doubt that you're going to hear every note that Robin Ford plays or Philip Sace. I guess that is the blessing of being Philip Sace or Robin Ford or any of these legendary players like Joe Bonamassa. You're going to get heard, whereas Johnny Dickhead over here or whoever, get used to the idea that actually on some gigs probably you're going to be told to turn down, and maybe that's fine. Just enjoy it anyway, I guess. But yeah, what I was thinking was, actually, might it not be a better idea, and I was going to maybe do an experiment with this, to have something like the Fryette Power Station. In general, we think about these things as attenuators and stuff like that, but what about it, we thought about it in a slightly different way, where it's like, well, actually our amps in general could be a bit smaller in some cases, like, I don't know, a 15 watt amp or whatever, or a 22 watt deluxe reverb. But the other thing is, this is like a 50 watt, I think there are some that are 100 watt, but if we really need to be heard louder with these things, like these things can go beyond what our tube amps can do. It was kind of the thought was like, well, what if we had like a smaller amp in general, you know, like an actual 5 watt or a Princeton or something like that, and when we need to be heard, we could bolster those things. But in the cases where, you know, people are really irritated by hearing some guitar coming from a stage volume, maybe a smaller amp might be the thing. But, I don't know, some things I've been thinking about. I do think, like, the feeling of playing when you know you're not being heard, or at least you think you know you're not being heard, is really quite like a feeling of despair. For me, anyway. Because I know that probably most of the time people aren't going to be listening anyway, but the idea that if they were trying to and they still couldn't pick you out, like in like loads of those gigs that I've been to where it's like I'm trying to listen for the guitar, still can't hear it. Jacob Collier with Ben Jones playing guitar, he was going through an HX Stomp, you know, massive band, loads of people on stage, couldn't hear any of it. I was actively trying to listen for Ben Jones because I love his playing. So that's one of those things where it's like, unfortunately, as a guitarist, I don't hear enough guitar or listening to bands playing live either. I could always do with a little bit more, but maybe that's not how the rest of the world feels. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.